Hi, I'm Evan of Evan Photography. I am a wife, mother of 3, and have been a professional photographer for over 12 years. I have a heart to help you capture better photos of your day-to-day life and the kids in it. My Photo Mamas Photography Masterclass will give you easy to understand tips on the creative and technical aspects of photography, so that after you watch this series, you will have the tools to capture those once-in-a-lifetime moments of your family with confidence and skill. Welcome, Photo Mamas! Hi, Photo Mamas, and welcome to the technical portion of our workshop. You will need your camera for this section, and when we are done, you are going to feel so accomplished, ready to take amazing photos. In this portion, we will cover equipment. We'll talk about cameras that you may choose. We'll talk about lens choices, and then the 3 exposure variables that I know you all want to know more about: ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. We'll wrap up with talks about our camera meter. Don't worry, I know you don't know what this is now, but we will find out and we'll do it together. Get ready and enjoy. There are many different camera choices. 3 we're going to talk about are your iPhone or smartphone, your point and shoot camera, or your DSLR, or what most moms refer to as their nice camera. For your iPhone, there are so many different ways we've already discussed in the creative portion on how to take interesting photos with a phone. As iPhones and smartphones have increased their quality in photo, point and shoot cameras are not as common as they used to be. Most now own either your smartphone or a DSLR. However, if you still have a point and shoot camera, do not get rid of them. The best camera is the one that you have with you. You can still change settings on point and shoot cameras, and you will learn more about that later in the video. Let's talk about DSLR. DSLR cameras are your digital single lens reflex cameras. Do not let that scare you. What that means is you can change the lens. If you have one lens that came with your DSLR camera, that is great. Learn how to use it. However, I highly recommend you getting several lenses for different needs. Let's talk about lens choice. There are prime lenses and zoom lenses. With a prime lens, it does not zoom in or out. What is great about them is they're less expensive and they take higher picture quality. However, you actually have to move your body to get closer to your subject and further away. As a professional photographer, when I'm taking photos of my kids, I'm constantly chasing them and running around after them, so zooming in and out really helps, even at a sports game. If you are going to have a prime lens, my favorite prime lens is the 50mm. It's one I have in my own camera bag. It's great for portrait shots, different shots of food, or things you want to get close on. But if you're chasing your child or dog for photos, I highly recommend a lens that zooms in and out. Here are a few examples of how changing the lens can change the look of the image. Whether you're getting in close or pulling back far, the perspective changes of the photographer and of the viewer. My favorite lens is the Canon 24 to 70mm lens. Now, I'm a Canon girl. There's also Nikons and a lot of great brands out there. For me, that's the lens I prefer and shoot most often with for portraits and at weddings. Many amateurs prefer the Canon 24 to 105. It weighs less and it's actually a little cheaper. It'll allow you to zoom in a little bit further at a sports event. So if you ask a professional, they might tell you the 24 to 70, but for you, the 24 to 105 would be a great lens. When we're discussing prime versus zoom lens, the number one way you can tell immediately if it is a prime or a zoom lens is by the little dash. If it says 50, it is a fixed prime lens. If it says 24-70, 24-105, that means it zooms from 24 to 105. This is a quick tip that'll help you know right away if it's fixed or zoom lens. Now let's discuss the 3 exposure variables. A correct exposure is your choice of ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. By learning what ISO, aperture, and shutter speed are, you can learn to control them without being on auto and get better photos and have more fun doing it. When your camera is on auto or in the automatic settings, you'll notice certain situations it does work, but then there are other situations where it's too dark or too light and you can't control it. When you go to manual or in the more manual settings that we'll talk about, you will be able to control and tell the computer inside the camera what you need or what you don't. These will make better photos for you to enjoy. Now get out your camera, Find the dial that changes the settings in your camera from aperture or your shutter speed or ISO. They are different in every model, so if you're unsure of how to change your ISO or aperture or shutter speed, look these up in your manual now. Let's talk about ISO. ISO controls light sensitivity and noise in a photograph. Go ahead and get your camera out, and in the menu, you'll change your ISO to either 100, 200, 400, 800, or even 1600 or higher. The lower the ISO, the smaller amount of light that your camera will actually use. So for instance, if it's a bright and sunny day, try setting your ISO lower to 100 or 200, and by that you're telling your camera it's really bright out here, we've got a lot of sunlight, we do not need any more light inside the lens. That'll help you take better photos on those days. For higher ISO settings, the more light your camera will use. For instance, setting your camera on 800 or 1600 tells your camera it is really dark out here, we do not have a flash, we need some help, we need to pull in as much light into the lens as we can to brighten up our photo. So try that. Try setting your ISO to 800 or 1600 if you're out at dusk or if you're inside taking photos of your kid's birthday party, and it will dramatically lighten your photos and give you a better look. Do note, when using a higher ISO, it increases the noise or grain in a photograph. Some photographers love this look. Do not be scared of it. If you need the light, going to a higher ISO is great. Just try to, if you can, use the lowest ISO possible for the situation. Now let's discuss aperture or f-stop. Aperture controls the depth of field in a photo. This is where I discussed earlier, moms have questions or how do I get the background blurry? This is the tip to show you how to do that. Go ahead and find A or AV on your camera dial now. Canons have AV on the dial, Nikons have A. Different brands will say different things, but you can refer to AV or A. By choosing this setting on your camera, you are actually setting it to aperture priority, which means you are selecting the aperture for your camera and the depth of field that you want for this photo, and then the camera figures out the shutter speed. You don't even have to worry about it. It's slightly automatic, but slightly manual at the same time. Numbers for aperture will look like this: 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, maybe even 22. By selecting these numbers, you're telling the camera if you want the background to be really blurry or more in focus. Let's talk about this a little further. A smaller f-stop or wider aperture will give you a shallow depth of field where the foreground can be in focus and the background can be blurred. Here's an example of the largest and smallest f-stops used together. Looking at them side by side, you can see how the foreground is in focus in both, yet the background is more blurred in the smaller f-stop, and with a larger f-stop, it's more in focus. For portraits of individuals or a smaller group of people, I typically shoot with a lower f-stop. About a 4 or 5.6 gives a nice blurred effect and really draws the eye to your subject. For larger group photos, maybe at a kid's birthday party or family reunion, try shooting with your f-stop at 16 or maybe even 22 to get everyone in focus. This will make sure that the people on the front row are in focus as well as the people in the back row. Photos with a smaller f-stop or wider aperture also allow your lens to take in more light. So if you are shooting indoors or at night, you can also lower your aperture to maybe a 4 or 5.6. This lets in more light to your lens and gets the brighter photos coming for those situations. Now it's time to talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed controls the movement of your subject. It is the amount of time that we are allowing the camera to record the picture. Find TV or S on your camera dial now. Canons will say TV and Nikons will say S. When you select this setting, what you're doing is you are selecting the shutter speed and allowing the camera to select the aperture. Roll your camera dial to change your shutter speed. For example, 1/60th of a second, 1/125th of a second, 1/200th of a second, or 1/500th of a second, and so on. A faster shutter speed freezes motion, and here are ways you might want to stop motion in your everyday. If you're at your child's baseball game and they've hit the ball running to first base, you can actually stop the motion of them running. If you're at the pool and your husband throws your child in the air, it can actually freeze your child in midair with water droplets, stopping this moment in time. Does your dog always show up blurry in photographs? A great way to stop his motion when you're at the dog park or in the backyard is to use a faster shutter speed. You can get his sweet little face more crisp and not blurred. Now that you understand more about ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, we can pull all of these together. Let's revisit our settings in our camera. You will see manual, AV or A, S or TV. Nothing else matters after that. We will no longer need to visit the auto settings. You understand how to pull shutter speed and aperture together, how they work, and you can go on manual. Let's pull it all together. If you are in a portrait situation, maybe at a birthday party, or taking pictures of your kids playing with their toys, set your camera to AV or A. You will select the aperture. Do you want the background more blurry? Set a lower f-stop. Do you want it more in focus? Set a higher f-stop. Then the camera will do the rest. If you are at a sports event trying to stop motion, set your camera to TV or S. You will select how fast you need your shutter to be to stop that motion, and the camera will decide the aperture. Once you have a better understanding of both of these areas, you can go all the way to manual. You will then select aperture and select the shutter speed. There is a great tip that is inside your camera already you may not even know about, and I'm going to teach you about it now, the in-camera meter. The in-camera meter is an amazing tool to help you achieve correct exposure when in manual mode. Look at the back of your camera screen now or in your viewfinder. You'll see a line that has a center point with a plus sign to one side and a negative sign to the other. As you point your camera different ways, you will see a tracking dot that will move to either plus or minus, indicating either overexposed or underexposed, too bright or too dark. Just as a reminder, you really only need to pay attention to your in-camera meter when you're shooting in manual mode. When you're in aperture priority, your shutter speed will be decided for you and will balance out your meter. When you're shooting in shutter priority, your aperture will be decided for you and will balance out your meter. But let's take that next step. Go to manual mode. I know you can do it. With this being a video workshop, you may be watching this at night. If so, try practicing these techniques in the daytime. You'll want to look for the best light in your house, as we've discussed, or step outside to a nice open shaded area and practice these techniques. Let's start and practice in manual. First, set your camera to manual mode. You'll then select your aperture, 5.6 maybe. Point the camera on your subject, pressing the shutter button halfway. This will allow it to focus on the subject and you will see the meter react. Is it showing overexposed, too bright, or underexposed, too dark? If it's showing too bright, you'll want to scroll your shutter until it evens into the center point of the meter. If it's showing too dark, scroll your shutter until it evens to the center point of the meter. Once you have it nicely on the center point or very close to it, take your picture. You will see that you should have a nice balanced light in your photo. If you don't right away, do not get frustrated. Check your settings again. Look at your ISO. If you're outside in a shaded area, maybe try 200 or 400. If you're inside in window light, try 400 or 800 ISO. Reset your aperture setting to 5.6. Press your shutter halfway to focus on your subject, then all the way to take the picture. Check your camera meter. If it's indicating too bright, adjust your shutter speed again. It's very important when trying to balance the meter that you make sure your lens is pointed to your subject. If you point it down to try and look at the meter and balance it out, you're actually metering off of the ground. If you pointed it out to the side and moved your body some, it might be metering off the sky and showing it's too bright. Make sure your lens stays pointed at your subject. You will then be able to balance out your meter and get a nice clear shot. Now, photo mamas, you have learned creative and technical aspects of photography, from light, perspective, and composition to the technical aspects of ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Do not fear any of these things anymore. You have the tools to take better photos of your everyday life and the kids in it. It will take some practice, but that's all part of the fun. I do not want you taking photos to compare yourself to others. The point of this is to get you taking better photos of your family that you can enjoy, things that you can be thankful for. Look back on moments and cherish them. If you are following people on Instagram that discourage you, that cause you to be jealous of their situations, I want you to unfollow them right now. I want you to encourage yourself you can do it. I want you to follow people that inspire you, people that encourage you in your day-to-day and the moments that you want to capture. This is not to compare to others or be discouraged if you don't get it right. Keep trying, keep practicing. The point is to capture those moments that you can cherish, or that face, that smile that grows up. You'll be able to look back and say, oh, that was his face that I loved. Oh, that was his blankie. Oh, that was my dog and their puppy stage. This is about you capturing the moments in your life and being thankful for them. Now, all you need to do is practice and have fun. Go to photomamas.com for quick tips that encourage you to practice and little things that'll help you say, let me try that. I hope you enjoy it, and I loved spending time with you.